Part 1. First contact at the edge of silence, 1100 words. The galaxy had seen many strange and powerful species. From the telepathic Rel to the flame-wielding Dravari, civilizations rose and fell, created alliances, and sometimes disappeared in the silence of space. But among the many dominant races, one species stood out not for their violence, technology, or philosophy, but for their precision. They were the Solari. The Solari were crystal-based life forms. Their bodies shimmered with translucent shells, shaped by natural geometric patterns, and their inner cores pulsed with radiant light that changed color depending on thought or emotion. To them, life was structure, order, balance. They viewed existence in terms of formulas and energy. Everything had a purpose. Everything had a function, including aesthetics, in Solari society. Beauty was just another data point. If a structure had pleasing symmetry or harmonious resonance patterns, it was considered efficient or pleasing to analysis. The idea of someone being beautiful just for being without calculation was not only strange, it was meaningless. And then humanity arrived. Humans were noisy, messy, full of emotion. They used inefficient metaphors. Their music was unstructured and chaotic. They contradicted themselves often, and they smiled even when in pain. It was madness. The Solari High Council was unsure whether to see them as a threat or curiosity. Dispatched one of their most respected ambassadors, Virel, to establish contact. Ambassador Virel was ancient by human standards. Her crystalline body shimmered with fractal perfection, and her light core pulsed a calm, calculating blue. She had seen empires rise, treaties signed, and wars prevented, all done with logic. She expected the same from this assignment, but then she met Lieutenant Marcus Hale, Earth's representative at the neutral diplomatic station known as Outpost Aurealis. It's located near the edge of the galactic core. He wasn't what she expected. Instead of a polished, emotionally distant negotiator, she was greeted by a tall, calm human with warm eyes, worn boots, and a quiet voice. His uniform was neat, but not rigid. His posture respectful, but relaxed. When she approached him, refracting light through her shimmering shell like a walking prism, he didn't launch into diplomatic protocol. He whispered something that stopped her in her tracks. My God. Her internal sensors flagged the phrase. She accessed the human linguistic database. God. Usage, religious figure, expletive, or expression of awe. God. Is that a spiritual invocation or an expression of alarm? She asked, tilting her head. Marcus blinked and cleared his throat. Sorry. I just wasn't expecting you to be well beautiful. Her light core flickered violet for a split second. It's unstable emotion, she self-diagnosed. A rare event. Beautiful is not a term relevant to Solari diplomatic profiles, she replied, puzzled. Please clarify which element of my structure is aesthetically pleasing. My prism geometry? My light resonance? He chuckled lightly. All of it, but it's not just about how you look. It's the way the light moves inside you, the way you walk. The silence between your words, it's all indescribable. There it was again, concept with no direct metric. Indescribable. She paused. That is not useful data. No, Marcus agreed. It's not data, it's a feeling. Virel filed the moment away as an emotional anomaly. Still, she couldn't stop her core from flickering again. In the following days, the two began formal talks. The Solari were cautious. Humanity, after all, was new. They had developed faster than light travel in under 2 centuries. The galactic powers didn't know whether to fear or ignore them. But Virel noticed something strange happening. Their meetings never stayed strictly diplomatic. Marcus had a habit of drifting off topic. He would bring up human art and offer Virel visual samples. She found them confusing. Paintings that made no logical sense. Colors that clashed. Shapes that served no function. But somehow, watching them made her inner light shift unpredictably. One evening, Marcus invited her to view a 3D projection of Earth's aurora borealis. She analyzed the shifting patterns of light dancing in the sky. Her sensors mapped the wavelengths. Her processors measured every oscillation. But still, She didn't understand it. "Why do you consider this beautiful?" she asked. Marcus didn't answer right away. He watched the lights in the sky, lost in thought. "It reminds me of being small, of lying in the snow, watching the universe swirl above, and feeling like I was part of something bigger. It doesn't make sense, but it feels like home." "Home," she repeated, another word difficult to quantify. Slowly, something began to change in Virel. Her reports back to the Shalari Council began including subjective phrases, descriptions like curious feeling or emotionally disruptive interaction. Her peers questioned her objectivity. And yet, she kept returning to Marcus. He spoke in ways that didn't fit into any protocol. He described her not with technical admiration, but with poetic nonsense that made her core stutter. "You look like a thought I forgot to think. Your voice sounds like a memory from a dream. I've never met a silence that said more than yours." It made no sense, and yet, every time he said those things, she glowed. It's not with calculation, but something deeper. Something raw. Her people couldn't see it, couldn't feel it. But she was starting to. One day, while walking the garden corridor aboard Outpost Aurealis, she stopped him. "You speak often of beauty," she said, "yet you never define it clearly. What if I asked you to measure it, quantify it? What would?" "You say—" Marcus turned, hands behind his back, and met her gaze. "I'd say, I can't. Because the moment I try to describe your beauty, I'd be lying." Her inner core dimmed slightly. "Then how do I trust it? Because you feel it. That's the point." She stared at him for a long time. The lights above reflected in her crystalline shell. Silence stretched between them, not awkward, but heavy, meaningful. And then her voice softened. "I do not know what I am feeling, but I suspect it is dangerous." Marcus gave her a quiet smile. Sometimes the best things are. From that moment on, nothing was the same for Virel. She had spoken with rulers, debated with philosophers, and negotiated with warlords. But nothing had ever unraveled her like the simple words of a human who claimed she was beautiful, and refused to explain why, not with data, but with silence. And that silence growing between them would change the galaxy forever. Part 2. Echoes of a Fragile Feeling, 1100 words. The Shalari High Council had begun to notice changes in Ambassador Virel's reports. Her usual precise data logs now included subjective impressions. Instead of numeric summaries, she submitted phrases like, "Interaction prompted internal resonance shift. Exposure to human metaphor caused dissonant emotional responses." This was concerning. Virel was one of the most structured minds among the Solari. Her logic was flawless, her diplomacy unmatched. But since her interaction with the human, Lieutenant Marcus Hale, her light patterns were erratic. Her thoughts, once neat and defined, had become blurred. Despite this, the Council did not recall her. They needed the alliance with humanity, Earth's rapid rise to spaceflight and its unconventional technologies were too important to ignore. And if understanding these emotional primitives required Virel to speak in metaphors, so be it. But Virel herself was beginning to question. What was happening? She had started dreaming. Celery didn't dream not in the human sense, their rest. Periods were used for information processing and core regeneration. But lately, during her rest cycles, Virel saw flashes, shimmering skies, colors with no wavelengths, and a strange sensation of being seen. She tried to purge the anomalies. But they returned, stronger each time. One day, Virel requested a private meeting with Marcus in the atmospheric gardens aboard Outpost Aurealis. The garden was built to accommodate species from both Earth and the Solari systems. Flora from dozens of worlds bloomed under simulated sunlight. It was a place of peace. It was the one place Virel had begun to feel safe. As she waited for Marcus, she replayed fragments of their past conversations in her mind. "You remind me of music I haven't heard yet. The space between your words says more than most. People's speeches. There are no words that can describe you. I've tried." These phrases confused her. They had no structure, no basis in logic, but they lingered decos she could not silence. Marcus arrived quietly, as he often did, with his hands folded behind his back and a relaxed human smile on his face. "You wanted to talk?" Was it, "Yes"? Her voice was soft, modulated. I need to understand something, she said. My beauty is beyond description. That it is not measurable. That it is a feeling. But how can something exist if it cannot be explained? Marcus stepped closer, looking at her with that same steady calm that always made her core flicker. Because not everything has to be explained to be real, he replied. Love, fear, all those things don't come with a formula. They just are, we feel them, and they change us. I don't understand, she admitted. I have studied hundreds of species. I have mastered countless languages. But every time you speak like this, I feel unstable. He nodded slowly. That's how you know it's real. Virel turned away, her core pulsing and uncertain. Violet hue. My people do not feel like this. We are balanced, harmonious, controlled. What you are doing, it disrupts that. I'm not doing anything, Marcus said gently. I'm just seeing you as you are. Those words hit her harder than she expected. As you are, no calculations, no evaluations. Just being the idea was terrifying. Over the next few weeks, their interactions deepened. The formal diplomatic meetings were nearly finished. The treaty between Earth and the Celery was almost complete. All that remained were ceremonial confirmations. But between those meetings, Virel kept returning to Marcus. They walked the gardens. They exchanged stories. Marcus showed her human music jazz. Opera lo-fi beats. She couldn't understand how such irregular rhythms could be enjoyable, but she listened anyway. Sometimes the notes would make her core flicker in unexpected patterns. Sometimes she liked it. She began experimenting with colors in her own. Light core shifting through shades of emotion she had never expressed before, not for her council, not even for herself. Only with Marcus. She didn't tell him why, but he noticed one day. They sat in silence beneath a flowering tree from Earth's blossoms, delicate and fragrant. Virel broke the silence. Do you believe something broken can still be beautiful? I guess. Smiled without hesitation. I think sometimes broken things are more beautiful. They carry history, pain, meaning. Virel's voice dropped to a near whisper. I am changing. I don't know if I can go back to who I was. Maybe you're not supposed to, Marcus said. Her core dimmed, and then she whispered something she had never said before. I am afraid. Marcus didn't try to comfort her with logic. He didn't offer an explanation. Instead, he just sat. Beside her, quiet, present, that silence held more truth than any speech. Back in her quarters that night, Virel stood before a mirror, an object she had never found necessary before. Celery didn't groom themselves for appearance. They maintained their forms for efficiency. But now she looked at herself, wondered. Her once perfect symmetry had begun to shift. Slight angles had appeared where before there were none. Her glow, once purely blue and stable, now flickered. In soft waves, sometimes lavender, sometimes gold. It would be considered a defect among her kind. But when she thought of Marcus calling it indescribable, she didn't feel shame. She felt something else. The next day she wrote in her report, human interaction has led to emotional mutation. Effects include unpredictable resonance shifts, loss of symmetrical cohesion, and the emergence of irrational attachment. Preliminary conclusion: this condition is not harmful. It may, in fact, be desirable. The council responded with concern. They suggested stasis treatment. She declined. She had made a choice, even if she didn't yet understand it. In a final private conversation before the signing ceremony, Virel confronted Marcus once again. You speak so casually of emotions, of beauty, but have you considered what it costs us? I may lose my position, my identity, my purpose. He looked at her with that same maddening calm. I know. I don't want to take anything from you, but I want you to know something. When I said you were indescribable, I didn't mean I didn't want to describe you. I meant that no words could do you justice. And that breaks me a little. Every time I try, her glow trembled. You would break over something you cannot explain. Marcus stepped closer, voice low. If it's you? Every time, Virel didn't know what emotion she was feeling. Her species had no word for it. but it was heavy, fragile. Fast she turned away. Got trembled. For the first time in her life. Part 3. The breaking point. 1100 words. The ceremony was supposed to be a celebration. Celery and humanity had finalized the treaty. What began as a diplomatic experiment had grown into an unprecedented alliance between two wildly different species, one logical, the other emotional. Ambassador Virel had been at the center of it all, but no one knew the toll it had taken on her. The Grand Treaty. Gala was held aboard the Celery flagship Resonant Grace, a massive crystal-structured ship orbiting a neutral moon. Delegates from over 20 species attended. Human generals wore medals. Solari mathematicians stood in perfect formation. Colors danced in the air. Music played from both civilizations in alternating sequences, and Virel stood beside Marcus. Hail. Glowing in shades that no longer obeyed her people's expectations, her once perfect symmetry now bore subtle irregularities. Her shell's edges had softened. Her light core pulsed gently in hues of lavender and amber colors once considered non-functional. To many Solari observers, it was a clear sign she was corrupted. But to Marcus, she was more radiant than ever. He said nothing yet, because he was waiting for the right moment. They stood in the garden dome at the rear of the ship. The view was breathtaking. A full 360-degree display of stars, nebulae, and cosmic clouds. Floating flora from a dozen worlds shimmered gently around them. The atmosphere was rich with gentle bioluminescent particles, simulating Earth's fireflies. Virel was quiet, her core pulsing faintly. Marcus could sense her tension. "Virel," he said gently, "you haven't said a word all evening." "I am processing," she replied, her voice softer than usual.
Yes.
"I have run hundreds of simulations, scenarios in which I stabilize, where I return to the Solari standard. Have any of them felt right?" She hesitated. "No." He smiled slightly. "Then maybe they aren't supposed to." She turned to him, her eyes glistening lenses of liquid crystals studying him deeply. "I have been an ambassador for over 300 years, she said. My identity was carved into me by precision, structure, purpose. But since meeting you, I no longer trust those things. My balance is gone." Marcus stepped closer, not touching her, but close enough that she could feel the heat of his presence. "I didn't mean to unbalance you," he said, "but sometimes." "The enemy of truth." Her voice trembled now.
Ow!
"You called me beautiful." "I did." "You said you couldn't describe it." "I meant it." "Oh." "Then why does it affect me like this?" She whispered, "Why does it hurt?" "And heal at the same time," he exhaled, choosing his words carefully. "Because love isn't a calculation. It's surrender to the unknown, to the indescribable." At that moment, something inside Virel cracked. Her body flickered uncontrollably. Her light core flared into chaotic display flashes of blue, violet, gold, then a deep, pulsing red. She stumbled backward, arms clutching at her own chest, as though she could hold herself together through sheer will. Her shell made a soft chima, typed resonance note that Solari emitted only during extreme emotional overload. Her voice broke, fragmented between syllables. I am fracturing." Delegates nearby turned in alarm. Two Solari aides moved toward her, but she lifted a trembling hand. "No, do not interfere." Marcus moved to her side, but still gave her space. "I'm here," he said quietly. "You're not alone." Tears real, human tears, pricked the edges of his eyes, not out of fear, but out of awe, because she wasn't breaking. She was awakening. The gala paused. The music faded. Everyone watched. Solari stood frozen, horrified at the display. They had no words for what they were seeing. A respected ambassador, once the model of perfection, now glowing in wild, unpredictable patterns, her form vibrating slightly, her voice raw. The humans watched too, but with a different kind of awe. They knew emotion. They knew what it meant. When someone was undone by feeling, Marcus stepped forward. Slowly. "If this is what breaking looks like," he said gently, "then it's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." Her trembling stilled for a moment. "You would break yourself. Over me? She whispered. Yes, Marcus said simply. Because in your reflection I see what we're all missing. Truth. Beauty that doesn't obey rules. Light that wasn't meant to be measured. The Solari scientists present began whispering urgently among themselves. To them, Virel was displaying signs of resonance collapse. The natural reaction would be to sedate her, stabilize her, and begin restorative realignment therapy. But before they could move, Virel turned to them. No. Her voice was clear, strong. I am not malfunctioning. I am becoming. The garden dome fell silent. Virel turned fully to Marcus now, the pulsing light within her flickering gently. More controlled than before, but still carrying that unpredictable glow. I have studied thousands of cultures. I have spoken in every language, but you showed me something outside of all of it. She stepped closer. When you told me I was indescribable, I didn't understand. I thought it was a flaw in your logic. But it was a truth I had no tools to hold. Marcus smiled. You don't need tools, you just need to feel it. One could call the shifting of her inner light an exhale, and then she did something no Solari had ever done in public history. She bowed her head, began to glow unevenly, a Solari form of weeping. Not in sadness, but in release. The next morning, the Solari Council convened an emergency meeting. They had watched the Gallus footage. Some called it a disaster. Others, a miracle. But one thing was certain. The ambassador had changed. And so had the Solari people. Because Virel's broadcast had been seen not just by dignitaries, but by citizens across both civilizations. What they saw wasn't weakness. They saw transcendence. Virel had experienced something the Solari had never understood, what humans called emotion without containment. The power to feel deeply without a logical path. The ability to see someone not as data, but as something worthy. Simply for being, she had shattered the mold, and something new had emerged from the cracks. Later, in a private moment, Marcus and Virel stood in silence again. Not the diplomatic silence of political meetings, a silence of shared space. Shared truth. I used to believe I could understand everything, Virel said softly. That with enough data, all things could be mapped. And now? Marcus asked. She turned to him. Now I know. The best parts of life can't be mapped at all. They must be felt, even if it breaks you. Marcus took her hand, and for the first time, she didn't flinch from the contact. That was the breaking point. But it wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of something far more powerful and emotional. Evolution, not just for Virel, but for an entire species. Part 4. The Resonance Shift, 1100 words. The moment Ambassador Virel trembled and glowed with uncontrolled emotion at the gala did not stay confined to the ship. Within hours, footage of the event had been transmitted, intentionally or not, to communication arrays across multiple star systems. First through diplomatic channels, then media networks, and finally into public forums across the Solari territories in human space. The galaxy watched a crystalline being, engineered for perfect logic and internal harmony, nearly collapse from a feeling she couldn't describe, caused not by war, not by trauma, but by a single human word: beautiful. And suddenly, everything began to change. The Solari people were stunned. For generations, they had lived by symmetry and structure. Emotions were known. Of course, they were beings, not machines, but feelings were categorized, subdued, and managed. Joy was harmony. Sorrow was imbalance. There was no space for anything unquantifiable. But Virel's breakdown, no, her awakening defied every principle they knew. Some elders demanded she be recalled and treated. Others suggested she had been psychologically manipulated. A few feared contagion, but then the reports started. From across Solari systems, messages began to arrive from younger members of their species, those who had viewed the footage and felt something stir within. They described internal resonance shifts, unusual light patterns, colors they had never displayed, fluctuations in their inner frequencies. One said, "I listened to a human's poem, and my light changed, and I liked it. Another, I viewed human paintings, illogical color-drenched. Madness. My symmetry fractured, but it didn't feel wrong. And then one message that reached the council directly, if this is what Virel has become, I wish to become it too. The Solari didn't have a word for this movement yet, but humanity did. They called it the resonance shift. Virel had been placed in voluntary isolation, not out of punishment, but concern. Her form was stabilizing, but she was different now. Her light didn't move in strict waves. Her shell no longer matched Solari alignment standards, but she felt no fear, only clarity. Marcus visited her often. Their talks were no longer formal. He brought her books, music, and stories. She listened not as a diplomat, but as someone hungry. To feel, one evening, he brought her a human object, a cracked ceramic bowl, mended with golden seams. It's called kintsugi, he explained. An old Japanese art form. When something breaks, we don't hide the cracks, we fill them with gold. The flaw becomes part of the beauty. Virel held the bowl, studying its imperfections. I was taught to erase flaws, to return all systems, to balance. Marcus leaned forward. What if your imbalance is what makes you, you? She didn't reply, but her core glowed with soft amber color of contemplation. Meanwhile, the Celery Council met in emergency session. One faction believed Virel had triggered a dangerous trend. Emotional instability could lead to chaos. Emotional exposure could spread like a virus, disrupting social cohesion. Another faction, smaller but growing, argued that this was evolution. A third, more silent group, simply began feeling things. For the first time, and they couldn't turn it off, the council reached no consensus, because the shift was already spreading. On distant research outposts, Solari scientists exposed themselves to human music and watched their core frequencies change. Some wept during their first experience with the symphony. Others listened to children's laughter from Earth and felt their crystalline shells vibrate not with logic, but with joy. Slackler, students began writing in metaphors. Teachers began using poetry to explain natural laws. Artists, once extinct, among their people reappeared. A celery poetess, poet named Tersil, submitted the first known resonance verse. She said, I glowed like a sunset seen through tears, though I had never wept, now I do. And the sunset has never been brighter. The celery hadn't just witnessed emotional awakening, they were embracing it. Humanity watched this all unfold with a mixture of fascination and humility. After all, they hadn't intended to change an entire species just by being themselves. But they also understood what was happening. Emotion wasn't weakness. It was connection. Earth's diplomats began receiving strange new messages from Celery citizens' requests, not for trade or treaties, but for stories. Requests for recordings of weddings, lullabies, campfire songs, anything raw, anything real. A Solari child on a trade ship asked a human technician, do your emotions hurt? The man smiled. Sometimes, and you choose to feel them anyway. He nodded. The child's core pulsed pink in wonder. Back on the Solari flagship, Virel was summoned for a final debrief. Her reappearance stunned the council. She entered the hall, not with her old geometric perfection, but wearing her new form proudly. Her shell bore natural asymmetries. Her glow changed constantly, soft blues, vivid golds, stormy violets. Ambassador Virel, one counselor began. What have you done? She stood tall. I have felt your body is no longer stable. Your light is fractured. No, she replied calmly. It is alive. Another asked, do you regret your contact with the human? Virel's glow shifted to a calm, luminous white. Every moment with him taught me something I could never compute. I was not broken. I was incomplete. A long silence followed. Then one counselor older, rigid, asked the final question. Then what do you propose? Virel turned to the chamber. I propose that we stop fearing the indescribable, that we open ourselves to the parts of life we cannot predict, that we allow beauty to exist without explanation. She paused, and if you fear what that may cause, then you are already too late because it's begun. That evening, she returned to Marcus in the observation dome. The stars wheeled slowly. Overhead, she sat beside him and whispered, "They will not stop it." "No," he said, "because it's not just a moment. It's a movement." He turned to her. "You changed them, Virel." "No," she corrected. The resonance shift spread like a quiet revolution. It didn't need war. It didn't need orders. It spread through feeling, through music, stories, glances, touches, silences. For the first time, Solari society wasn't just evolving technologically. It was growing emotionally, not through conquest, but through love. Part 5. A new kind of language. 1100 words. The resonance shift had begun as a tremor, an isolated moment of emotional collapse aboard a diplomatic vessel. But it had become a wave, rolling through Solari society like a tide that no one could stop. And now, it was no longer just affecting individuals. It was reshaping culture. It was rewriting identity. And at the center of it stood Ambassador Virel. It's no longer the model of symmetry and balance, but something new. Something Solari had no name for, but humans called humanity. The formal treaty between Earth and the Solari was signed exactly one standard cycle after the gala. This time, it wasn't signed in a sterile conference hall. It was held in the newly constructed Solar Human Empathic Exchange Embassy. A hybrid structure built on a shared orbital platform designed with equal parts mathematical architecture and chaotic organic beauty. Curving uneven walkways flowed alongside gleaming crystalline towers. Trees from Earth grew, alongside floating plants from the Solari's bioluminescent jungles. The embassy was a symbol of the new age, and Marcus, Hale and Virel were its first ambassadors. They stood side by side at the ceremony, not as representatives of two alien species, but as two souls who had chosen to understand one another beyond language. The ceremony was different from others in Solari history. There were no long legal documents read aloud, no endless streams of data. Instead, Virel opened the event with a poem, not a technical address, a poem in Solari dialect, filled with layered harmonics and carefully modulated frequency pulses. She recited something completely new, once I shimmered by rule, by code, by form. Then he said, "You are the storm before the stars I shattered, and I was born." The room was silent. Then came applause, not only from the humans, who understood the emotion, but from Solari as well, whose cores glowed in sympathetic hues. Some even wept. Over the months that followed, the empathic exchange became more than just a place for diplomacy. It became a place of learning. Solari scholars came in droves, not to study human technology, but to understand their art, their emotions, their philosophies. They were eager to listen to music that had no rhythm, examine paintings that broke perspective, to hear stories that ended in tragedy, love, or both without offering clear answers. One young Solari named Cirrus, who had once trained to be a frequency engineer, dropped out of school to become a composer. "I heard a human child sing," he said in a public interview. "There were no patterns in the melody, but when she smiled, I felt it inside my core." He then composed the first ever Solari lullaby. Virel and Marcus worked tirelessly. They gave talks together. They taught workshops. Virel spoke on the concept of indescribability, how some things must be felt, not measured. Marcus explained human art through the lens of vulnerability, how stories were a form of survival. They even created a cross-species curriculum titled Feeling Forward, which became mandatory in Solari youth education. The lessons included silence and its emotional weight, how to sit with another being without speaking the language of light and body. When logic must be set aside to honor emotion, it was revolutionary. In one such lesson, a young Solari student raised her hand. "Ambassador Virel?" she asked. "Do you regret breaking?" Virel paused, and then answered slowly, "No, because I did not break into nothing. I broke into someone new." The student's core pulsed bright pinka Solari, sign of resonance with another's emotion. And then she whispered something that no Solari child had ever dared say before. You're beautiful. Varel later told Marcus that moment meant more to her than the treaty ever could. Not because the child said it, but because she understood. Their work did not go unnoticed. Across the galaxy, other species, long distrustful of humans, began to reevaluate their assumptions. If humans could reach beings as precise and logic-bound as the Solari through nothing but emotion, then perhaps their other so-called chaotic tendencies were not flaws, but gifts. A species of ocean-dwelling tacticians, known as the Nurlothi, invited Marcus and Varel to speak at their annual council, where no outsiders had ever set foot. An avian empire from the Fringwens sent their artists to Earth to learn about improvisation. Even the cold, warlike Tarkin clans, who had once mocked human softness, began distributing translated collections of human poetry among their officers, a tradition developed among Tarkon soldiers before every battle. They would read a line of human verse aloud in silence, not as superstition, but to remember why they fought. And then came the message that changed everything from the Celery homeworld. Once a bastion of emotional restraint and sterile perfection, came a public transmission. Newborn had pulsed in asymmetrical color on the day of its hatching. The parents did not seek correction, they celebrated. They named the child Varellus, after the ambassador who had taught them that some light was meant to bend. Varel sat in the gardens of the embassy one evening, staring up at the stars. Marcus sat beside her, reading quietly. She turned to him, voice soft. "When you first said I was indescribable," she murmured, "I thought you were lying." "I wasn't," he said, setting the book down. "I still can't describe you? Even now?" He looked at her. "No, because you keep changing, and that's the most beautiful thing." Her glow shimmered in warm rose-gold hues. "I used to fear change," she whispered. "And now I dance in it." They sat in silence, not because they had nothing to say, but because silence was the only language that could hold what they felt. And so the galaxy changed, not through invasion, not through force, but through a moment of vulnerability, spoken in a word too large for language, beautiful, a word that made a being tremble, a word that tore down walls older than empires, a word that proved to beyond equations and energy that the most powerful force in the universe. Connection.